So, John, upgrades are always an important process of, just general operations. It's one of the, the key responsibilities that you have in the data center. How do you update vSAN clusters faster and more efficiently?
So a couple things to think about. One, how do we speed up some of those processes? So one thing is if you're trying to patch, the drivers and the firmware and the vSphere version, let's try to get that into as fewer reboots as possible and structure that. So using VLCM with the hardware provider can help kind of stage all those components together. If you're on a hardware, your servers aren't supported by VLCM, maybe you log into the out of bands and stage those firmware to be patched at next patch. That way, when you hit a host, you just have to hit it once, and you don't have to have some, substantial waiting on through that cycle. If we're not patching the firmware of the BIOS and we're just patching ESXi itself, for instance, let's check that box for quick boot. So that's where we're going to avoid having to go down and do the full post initialization and watch it scrub, count memory and count nicks and count sheep. And I'm falling asleep already. But no, it's, quick boot basically skips all that and just goes straight to that, the black and yellow ESXi boot screen. That helps a lot. Newest vSAN releases also, we've done a lot. We do parallelization of how we do some of that data replay. We stage what used to, we have to rebuild some memory tables. Now we just stage that to disk, then we pull it right back up. Durability components. These things are magic. Introduced in 7 update 1 for updates, 7 update 2 for unplanned failures. These severely curtail the need to do things like full evacuations. And in cases where you're just using the maintain availability, they help give you better durability, but they also reduce the time, especially with RAID 5, RAID 6. It's just basically doing a log replay once that host comes back online of what were the missing writes versus having to do parity math and reconstruct objects. And lastly, get better boot devices. Let's get those, M.2. I think I've got one here. Here we go. It's got my little M.2 device. Let's get these better boot devices because they take updates faster. They read faster. So when we're booting, they boot faster. Those cheaper embedded devices, the SD cards and USB, they can be slower to boot. So this is just, all of this leads to, what's the outcome here? Faster patch windows. Faster patch windows means John gets to go home earlier, do dinner, or maybe this stuff's so fast I can just do it in the middle of the lunch while no one notices because of the magic of vMotion and durability components. And maybe I don't have to stay up at night and, people, confuse me for a vampire. So good stuff.
Well, no, and really, when you think about it, it's this is our effort to transition in a way, this notion of updates being this monolithic effort, and you can do it at a much more iterative fashion, much quicker. And I think that what you shared there about, it's the combination of all those things that it sounds like is really the best way to make the environment better and that lifecycle management of that environment better.
Well, and lastly, just sometimes think about your operational processes. If just doing minor ESXi patches doesn't really cause issues, or maybe you test one host, you leave it for a day, okay, nothing really weird happened. Maybe I'm just going to go update the rest. And I'll admit, when I was working with Teddy on patching our cluster the last time in the lab, after I tested that one host, I tested the waters. I just loaded the rest in, hit update, and I went off and made lunch. Had a nice salad, put some pecans, some balsamic drizzle on there. And then when I came back, I was like, oh, that lunch was great. And I forgot the cluster's now upgraded. So let's try to not make that always this monolithic thing of, the most minor of patches. We're like, let's have all hands on deck and do this at 3 a.m. when we're kind of foggy in the head. Let's normalize patching in the middle of the day when possible. I mean, remember, DRS and vMotion exists to evacuate hosts. So if that host comes back, and let's say it didn't like the patch and it gets angry, VUM or VLCM, they just stop what they're doing and say, hey, something bad happened here. Let's go clean up that host. So as long as you're at N+1 or N+2 on your capacity in your cluster, you don't necessarily have to be eyes on glass.